Story 1. When I was 23, I took a temporary job as a surveyor's assistant in a tiny, forgettable place called Merriton Hollow. Just a cluster of homes tucked away in northern Maine, surrounded by woods so dense it felt like the forest itself was trying to erase the town. The county wanted to map some of the unused land for possible development, and I was just there to help collect data. Simple stuff. Nothing I hadn't done before. The weirdness started right away. The silence wasn't normal. It wasn't peaceful like you'd expect in the middle of nowhere. It was unnatural. No wind in the trees, no birds, not even the hum of insects. Just nothing. The whole place felt like it was holding its breath. Carl, my supervisor, was a quiet man. He'd worked that area before, and when I asked him about Merriton Hollow, he'd just shrug or change the subject. "People like their privacy up here," he said once. "You'll get used to it." But I didn't. Each morning, we'd drive past the last gas station, down a cracked road that looked forgotten by time. We'd park by a chained-off path and hike deep into the woods with GPS units and measuring tape. Every time, Carl would say the same thing: stick to the trail, don't wander, no shortcuts. One afternoon, I dropped the GPS unit. It slipped from my belt and tumbled down a slope. Carl was ahead and out of sight. I called to him, but got no answer. Figuring I could retrieve it quickly, I slid down the embankment. That's when I found the clearing. A perfect circle, maybe 20 feet across, with nothing growing inside. No grass, no weeds, just dark soil like it had been burned clean. Scattered around the edge were bones, small ones, skulls too, squirrels, birds, maybe a fox. Dozens of them, partially buried, like someone had tried to hide them and gave up halfway. I stood there, staring, feeling colder than the shade should have made me. Then I heard the click of a camera behind me. "Carl, you weren't supposed to see this," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was tired, like he'd been waiting for this moment. I tried to laugh it off, but he just stared into the trees. "They know now," he murmured. "It doesn't like being noticed." That night, I couldn't sleep. My motel room backed onto the woods. Around midnight, I noticed lights in the forest, faint orange glows, moving in patterns too erratic to be flashlights. At first, I thought it was hunters, until one of the lights broke away from the rest and started drifting straight toward my window. Not fast, just deliberate. I shut the curtains and turned off every light in the room. I sat on the floor, knees to chest, for hours. The next day, Carl didn't show. I called him. No answer. I called the landline for the office. Dead tone. So I drove to the edge of the forest and waited. Nothing. I stepped into the trees and called his name. That's when the trail vanished. It wasn't gradual. I took a few steps, looked down, and the markers were gone. I turned around. Nothing looked familiar. The trees seemed thicker, taller, wrong. I checked the GPS. It wouldn't load. My phone went black. though I'd charged it that morning. Then I saw the stump. It was carved with symbols, spirals, jagged crosses, loops that didn't close. When I blinked, the symbols looked different, like they rearranged themselves. My ears started ringing. My stomach twisted. I backed away, heart pounding, and somehow stumbled out of the woods onto the road. That night, something scratched at my motel window. Slow, long drags across the glass. Not tapping, scratching. I didn't look. I don't know why, but I knew if I looked, I wouldn't be able to leave. The next morning, I found Carl's truck parked outside my room. The windshield was shattered from the inside. The front seat was soaked with something dark and sticky. No sign of him. I packed everything and drove to the sheriff's office. It was empty. Lights off. Door unlocked. It looked like no one had been inside in years. Dust on the desks, cobwebs in the corners. And yet, just 2 days earlier, I'd been there, signing liability waivers. I left town on foot. I walked 9 miles to a diner along Route 12 and begged to use their phone. I called the state police. They said they'd investigate. 2 officers were sent. A week later, I followed up. They said there was no town called Merriton Hollow. No records, no land registry, no signs of Carl. I drove back up there myself a month later. Nothing. Just trees. No road, no gas station, no buildings. The stretch of highway where I should have turned was gone. Just endless forest. Still, I know what I saw. I know what followed me back to that motel. I see it in dreams sometimes. Lanterns swaying between the trees. Bones peeking through black soil. And every once in a while, when I'm driving alone late at night, I see a dirt road where there wasn't one before. I never take it, but I always wonder, what if I already did? Story 2. I never liked visiting my uncle in Roseville. It wasn't that the town was unpleasant. It was just too quiet, too clean. The kind of place where all the houses look copied and pasted, where lawns are trimmed to military precision, and every neighbor waves like they've practiced the motion in a mirror. But after my dad died, my mom begged me to go stay with Uncle Harris for a few weeks, to clear my head. He lived alone on the outskirts of Roseville, in one of those older houses from before the developers came in and built their cul-de-sac clones. His place sat on a long, curving street that backed into overgrown woods, thick, unmaintained, and fenced off with rusted iron bars that had clearly lost their purpose. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Not bad exactly, just old, like dry rot and stale air. Harris hadn't changed much in 20 years. Same plaid shirts, same permanent 5 o'clock shadow, same odd tension in the way he talked, like he was always choosing his words carefully. That first night, I asked him about the woods behind the house. He didn't look up from his tea. "Don't go back there," he said. "Why?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Things don't stay dead in those woods." I laughed. He didn't. Later that night, I went out to the backyard to smoke. I stood near the fence, looking into the tangled forest. Even at night, the trees looked too tall, like they'd grown in a rush. I heard something move just beyond the fence, slow crunching steps in dry leaves. Probably a deer, I told myself. But then came a sound that didn't belong to any animal. Humming. A soft, off-key hum. It stopped the second I stepped closer. The next morning, I mentioned it over breakfast. Uncle Harris didn't respond. He just scraped burnt toast into the sink, his knuckles white around the knife. "People go missing in Rosevale," he said after a long pause. "More than you'd think for a town this size. And no one ever talks about it. Just like they don't talk about the cemetery." I hadn't even known Rosevale had one. He offered to take me, which shocked me. Harris never volunteered anything. The cemetery was small, tucked behind the woods, up an overgrown hill you'd miss unless you knew where to look. No paved path, just a trail worn down by time and weather. The headstones were old, cracked. Many had no names, just symbols. Circles with lines through them, eyes, crooked stars. One stone in the back had Harris's last name on it. My last name. "I've never seen this grave before," I said. He didn't look at me. "I have." The wind picked up. I heard leaves moving in a pattern that sounded like footsteps circling the hill. I felt watched. That night, I dreamed of digging. Hands blistered, dirt caked in my nails, scraping at a headstone until it bled. I woke up gasping, my sheets tangled and damp. My nails were black with soil. I didn't sleep after that. The next day, Harris had a deep scratch across his neck. He said he fell trimming hedges, but there were no trimmed hedges anywhere. When I pressed him, he lost his temper, something I hadn't seen since I was a kid. "If you see her, don't speak to her," he growled. "That's how it starts." I didn't ask who her was. I didn't want to know, but I already had an idea. That night, I heard humming again. I stayed inside, but I opened the curtains just a little, just enough to see. A girl, pale skin, dark hair, tattered white dress, stained with something dark. She stood just inside the tree line, her head tilted, face in shadow. She was humming, low and off-key, and her eyes, they didn't reflect the porch light. They didn't reflect anything. I closed the curtains and backed away, but the humming didn't stop. It went on for hours, getting softer, only when the sun rose. Harris was gone that morning. His truck was in the driveway, keys still on the hook. I searched the house. His bed was made, no note, just gone. I called the police. The Rosevale officer arrived, barely listened, took notes like it was a formality. He didn't even step inside the woods. When I insisted they search the cemetery, he smirked. "What cemetery?" He was serious. I walked him to the trail, but it was gone. Trees had swallowed it overnight. Where there had been a path, now there was nothing but thick underbrush. Back at the house, I checked the shed. The lock had been snapped. Inside was a shovel, recently used, muddy. Next to it was a Polaroid photo, tucked between tools, a picture of me sleeping, taken from inside the bedroom. That night, I locked every door and window. I kept the lights on. But around 2 a.m., the power died. Total darkness. I heard the humming again. This time, it was inside the house. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat in the corner of my room, staring at the door. It never opened. But the humming got louder, closer, and then I saw her. Not walking, just appearing, like when your eyes adjust and something was there the whole time. She stood in the corner opposite me, mouth open too wide, the sound pouring out like a broken music box. Her skin was cracked, gray, rotting in places. Her hands were too long. Fingers curled backward like snapped twigs. She was watching me without blinking. I passed out. When I woke, it was daylight. The house was empty again. No sign of her. No sign of Harris. I left that morning and never went back. Years later, I returned. I don't know why. Closure, maybe. Curiosity. I told myself the house would be gone, but it wasn't. Worse, someone else lived there now. A family, 2 kids. They waved as I drove by, smiling like they'd practiced it in a mirror. The woods looked the same, too tall, too still. Before I left town, I checked the library for any records of the cemetery. Nothing. No maps. No death registries. It was like it never existed. But I remember every grave, especially the one with my last name. And every now and then, I dream of digging again. Except now, I'm not the one holding the shovel. Story 3. I was 28 when I moved to Larkspur Ridge, a sleepy mountain town with 1 gas station, a library that closed at 4 p.m., and a population that seemed to hover just under 500. I needed to get out of the city after a breakup left me hollow. The pace of Larkspur felt like the right kind of quiet. I rented a small cabin at the edge of town, cheap because of its location. Remote, the listing said. Private, secluded. The kind of place you'd assume was perfect for writing, meditating, or losing your mind. My nearest neighbor, Wallace, lived about half a mile down the road. He was polite, but distant, always speaking in clipped phrases. Every time I asked about the history of the area, his face would tighten. Old things in these hills, he'd say. Best not to dig them up. I assumed he meant folklore, ghost stories, and mountain legends. For the first few weeks, everything was fine. Peaceful, even. I worked remotely, cooked for myself, and explored the walking trails that wound through the thick pines and jagged rock outcrops. But one night, about 3 weeks in, I woke up to the sound of knocking. 3 soft taps. I live alone. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. The knocking came again, measured, not urgent. I glanced at the clock. 3:13 a.m. I crept to the window and pulled the curtain back just a little. No one was there. I told myself it was a tree branch, or maybe an animal, and went back to sleep. But I didn't really sleep. The next morning, I found footprints in the frost outside my front door. Human, barefoot. They led into the trees and disappeared. I brought it up casually when I saw Wallace. He didn't respond at first, just stared at me like I'd said something offensive. "You didn't open the door, right?" I shook my head. "Good. Don't ever open it. Not at night." I waited for a punchline that didn't come. His eyes didn't leave mine. "What is it?" I asked. Wallace rubbed his hands on his jeans. "Some people think it's a spirit. Others say it's a man. Doesn't matter. It knocks. It waits. And if you let it in, you're not the same after." I should have laughed, should have brushed it off, but I couldn't. Not after seeing those prints. That night, I left all the lights on, locked every window, kept a heavy flashlight beside me in bed like a weapon. But nothing happened. The next night, the power went out. Right on cue. 3:13 a.m. The knocking came again. 3 taps. I stayed frozen in bed, eyes wide, breath shallow. 3 taps again, a little louder. It wasn't the door this time. It was the window. Something about that small change rattled me more than anything. I didn't move until dawn. I called the town's utility line the next morning. They said my outage was isolated. No reason. "Could be the breaker," the guy said. "Might want to get someone to look at that." I didn't bother. I knew it wasn't the breaker. That night, I didn't go to sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on, waiting. The knocking didn't come, but around 3:30, I heard something else. Breathing, heavy and slow. It came from the other side of the front door, right against the wood. I stood frozen, and it kept going, steady, almost relaxed, like whoever was out there had all the time in the world. Then it stopped. Silence. And then, from the other side of the door, a voice just above a whisper. "You already let me in." I didn't scream. I couldn't. My legs gave out, and I sat on the floor until morning light leaked through the windows. I didn't tell Wallace. I packed a bag and drove into town. The motel was full, so I slept in my car behind the library. The next day, I went to the sheriff. His name was Ramsey. Middle-aged, polite in that condescending way small-town cops can be. He listened, nodded, took notes. When I mentioned the knocking, the barefoot prints, the voice, His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "You drinking at all out there?" he asked. "No." "Taking anything? Meds?" I stood up and left. I went back to the cabin, grabbed more of my things, and left for good. Or I thought I did. Here's where it gets strange. A few weeks after I left Larkspur Ridge, I started getting mail. Envelopes with no return address. Inside were Polaroids, shots of my cabin at night. One showed the front door, another showed the window. One was taken from directly above my bed. I moved, changed my number, burned the photos, but the knocking followed me. Different towns, different homes, always 3:13 a.m. Always 3 soft taps. Sometimes it's the window, sometimes the front door. Once it came from my bedroom closet. I never open. I never speak, but the voice always comes eventually. "You already let me in." At first I thought it was in my head, that I'd lost it. But then it started appearing in places it couldn't have followed me to. I spent one summer in Spain, Barcelona, in a friend's flat on the 4th floor of a building with a digital entry lock. One night at 3:13 a.m., there it was. 3 soft taps on the window. 4 stories up. I didn't sleep for days. Now, I live in a small studio apartment above a laundromat in a city where no one knows me. I don't tell people my real name. I keep the lights on all night. But it doesn't matter. It's still coming. It doesn't need a door. It doesn't need permission anymore. I don't know what I let in. I don't remember doing it. Maybe I dreamed it. Maybe I did open the door and it erased the memory. Maybe it was never about the door at all. I don't think it wants to hurt me. I think it wants me to change. I see it sometimes. Its shape in mirrors. Its outline in my shadow. I hear it humming when I brush my teeth. My reflection doesn't move exactly the way I do anymore. There's always a delay, a half-second twitch that doesn't match. I'm not scared of it now. I'm scared of the day I stop being afraid. Because maybe that's what it's waiting for.